Hello, today I'm going to be teaching you how to play Aeons, and this is by Action Phase Games and Indie Boards and Cards. And it is a cooperative deck building game where we are playing mages who have these special abilities to cast spells using these breaches. It's the end of the world, and demonic monsters are coming through these breaches, and they've got lots of health, and we've got to kill them with our spells. We are in a town called Gravehold, which also has some health, and we win if we defeat the monster. We lose if Gravehold gets to 0 health. Just a little bit more backstory to sort of explain how the game plays. We have these breaches in front of us. Every character has a specific starting setup for where their breaches should be. Everybody usually has at least one breach open. When you have a breach, you can play a spell to it. Spells are generally what cause damage to the monster. We all start with a certain set of cards in our hand. The interesting thing about this game is that unlike other deck builders, you start with a certain set of cards in your hand, like deck builders, but when you play cards, you put them in your discard pile, and you never shuffle. If you ever need to draw a card, you just take your discard pile, flip it over, and put it where your deck would be. So you always know kind of the order in which your cards are going to come out. So that's a neat thing about this game. That's the cool twist, in addition to being a good cooperative deck builder. So for the opening setup, the game has an excellent thing that it does. I've already opened the game already, but essentially all the decks come kind of pre-shrinked, and the first thing it tells you to do with this nice little page, it says, stop, open deck A, do the things you need to do. So I've got this all set up to how it should be, but you can set up the board however you like. In the game, there are these things which are called gems. They provide you money, which is this symbol here, which is called ether in the game. So for setup, you're always going to have 3 gems. You have 2 relics. These usually do something special, they can be support type items. And then you have spells. You're always going to have 4 spells. The spells are the things that deal damage. A little bit of info about these cards. In the top right corner, that's the cost. Again, down here is the name, the type of card. And then if there is in action, it might say this or this. You can only choose one of those items, obviously, when that comes up. So the other interesting thing, there's lots of interesting things about this game. Hopefully I don't forget anything. There are a lot of little twists. When you start, everybody has a player marker, so player 1, player 2, but you don't go in order. It doesn't go player 1, player 2, and then the monster. You have this turn order deck, and it's seeded depending on how many players you have in the game. So in a 2-player game, player 1 goes once, player 1 goes twice, player 2 goes twice, and the monster goes twice. But you don't know in what order, because these all get shuffled up, and then we flip them over. Then monster might go first, Nemesis goes first. But the Nemesis might go twice in a row, or you might have 4 turns in a row with your players doing something, and then the Nemesis goes twice. You never really know. This always gets shuffled up. Once you're done dealing them all out, you shuffle them up again, and then you deal them out again. So these player markers, they're really art markers, just not really turn order. Turn order is determined by this deck. So to start, we have our starting hand, which is listed there. We have our starting breaches, which are set up here. We have our player marker, and then we have our starting health, which is 10. You can never go above 10. Gravehold starts at 30. You never go above 30. Same thing, monster starts at 70, or different levels depending on who you're playing with. This guy starts at 70, and this deck of cards is also set up in a specific way. This is the monsters deck of cards. the setup instructions are in the rules, but basically you see that little number 3 down there. That basically means that it's the more difficult thing to get rid of. Further on you see a number 2, and then closer to the top you'll see a number 1. So basically the easier stuff comes out first, then it gets harder and harder as you go on, which makes sense because, you know, as you build your deck, you're going to get better and better spells and be able to do more damage. There are 4 different Nemesis in the game that come with the starting set. They all do something different. Right now we're playing with the starting monster, which is the Rageborn, and they have special effects, which I will get to, but again, everybody kind of has a different special thing that happens to it. So, for the start of the turn, let's pretend like this is the order. So player 2 goes first, and player 2 is this character Brahma. So they have their starting hand, which is 4 crystals, which gives them 4 money, and then they have a spell, Buried Light, deal 1 damage, gain 1 ether. Now spells, you cannot just play a spell, you have to play it onto a breach. You can play spells onto opened breaches, and then they will stay there because at the beginning of your turn you were able to cast spells. Your very first turn you don't have any spells to cast, but let's say this was my second turn, I have this spell in my breach, my open breach, I can cast it, which would deal the enemy 1 damage, and I can deal it to wherever I like. It could be to the main boss, or it could be to some of the minions that will come out later, and then I would gain 1 ether. When I am playing cards, I mentioned that nothing gets shuffled when you put things in the discard pile, which is true. Whenever you cast a spell, that would immediately go into your discard pile. Whenever you purchase any items out here, those immediately go into your discard pile. But then, at the end of the turn, any cards that you also played, like let's say if I played these, it's kind of a bad example, but let's say I had these cards. Let's see if I can get a better example. Okay, so let's say I have this spark in my hand. I've spent these 2 crystals, and I spent these 2 crystals and this spark. I can choose to put the spark at the bottom of the deck, or in the middle, or wherever I like. The cards that you play can go into the discard pile in any order you like. It's just that when you cast spells, those immediately go discard. When you buy things, those immediately go into the discard. So, in any case, so my first turn, the first thing you always do is casting. I didn't have anything to cast, so I played all my cards. You can do a number of things on your turn. You can, I'm just going to go through the list here. You can play a gem or a relic card. So these are gems, and again the relics are up here, which do, you know, certain support type things. You can play as many gems or relics as you like. You can gain a card. So if I have 4 crystals here, each crystal gets me 1 ether. So I'd have 4 ether to spend. So I could decide to purchase this focusing orb here, or I could purchase this diamond cluster here. This thing says I gain 2 ether, and if this is the second time you have played diamond cluster this turn, you can gain an additional 2 ether. So this is kind of neat because I can buy that, and then I can set it up so that if I bought another diamond cluster, I would put them both next to each other so that I could play them both and then get bonus stuff happening. You can gain a charge. So charges are these little spots right here on your board. Each charge costs 2 ether, and they are these little pieces right here. So I could purchase and spend 2 crystals and purchase a charge. And the charge doesn't do anything until it's all filled up. Once all of these spots are filled up, then during your main phase, you can give any player 4 life. Again, they can't go over 10. But this is something nice. Every player kind of has something special that they can do. Gian here can cast any player's prep spell without discarding it, and then cast the prep spell again. So she only needs 4 charges for that, whereas Bron needed 5 charges. So each player, like I said, has a different play style, which is neat, different deck of cards, which is really cool. So you can gain a charge. You can focus a breach. Now, I mentioned earlier you can play spells to opened breaches. That's generally where you're going to play spells, and they'll hang out there. But if you wanted to focus a breach, these breaches, all breaches basically in different spots will say this costs 2 to focus, this costs 3 to focus, that costs 4 to focus. Or if you just wanted to open it, you could just spend the amount that's listed at the top there to open it. So 4 ether just to open it. So I could just open this outright and just play it out, and now this is going to stay open for the rest of the game. If I didn't want to open it, let's say I didn't have the money to do it or whatever, I can focus it. So to focus, I'm going to spend 2, and then I rotate this in the direction of this arrow. Now you can see that it becomes cheaper for me to open it next turn. It used to be 4, now it's 3. So that's nice. You know, if you don't have enough money to do it all in one go, like this one costs 7 to open, so you know you might not have all that, but you might be able to focus it, and then now it only costs 4 to open. So you see it's a little bit nicer in that area. When you focus a breach, if you have focused it that turn, you can play a spell onto a focused breach. Even though it's closed, because you focused it, you can play a spell there. So, you know, you could play those 2 spells there, and that's fine. At the beginning of your next turn, at the very first part of your turn is called the casting phase. In the casting phase, again, you may cast any spells in open breaches, but you must cast any spells that are in closed breaches. So you can't hold on to those. So I would cast it, deal 1 damage, gain 1 ether, put it in my discard pile, and then go on. So, focusing a breach, opening a breach, that's another 2 things you can do. You can prep a spell to the breach, which is playing the spell card to these spots. Some spells will have effects that say while prepped. For instance, this card, while prepped during your main phase, you may spend 2 ether to cast any player's prepped spell. So if this spell was prepped, let's say at the beginning of my turn, I decide to prep it, and then I can do the while prepped action. So that's something you can do on your turn. Also, if there are cards that say to discard, which are generally the monster deck, which I'll show in just a second, you can resolve those on your turn as well. So once you have played as many cards as you like, let's say I only wanted to spend 2 ether this turn, and let's see here, I'll put that over there, this over here. So I only spend 2 crystals this turn, and all I wanted to do was, I don't know, buy this jade for 2. So I'd put that here. Now these 2 crystals that I didn't spend stay in my hand. Because unlike other deck builders, you don't just play what you have and then you discard everything else. No, you keep these in your hand. So that's nice because you can prep your hand. If you didn't have enough money this turn, you can wait until the next turn. So I'd have 2 cards in my hand. I would always draw up to 5. So as you can see now, I have 5 crystals set up, and I knew that going into it because I knew what was in my hand. So I'd have 5 crystals now, which is great because then maybe I really want to buy this Essence Theft for my next turn. Anyways, that is your draw phase. You pick those as many cards up to get to 5, and then that's your turn. Then the next turn order card will get flipped. So if it's a Nemesis card, then you are going to do a few things. So this is the Nemesis deck. Again, as I said, it's prepped in the beginning in a specific order. Generally, you're just going to flip. This also has a strike deck, which is something I'll get to. Each Nemesis usually has something special going on with it. This Nemesis has a strike deck, which is separate. So the cards that the Nemesis will spit out, essentially the Nemesis has its own action phase. First thing it does is it's going to flip over a card. If it's an attack card, then it's going to happen immediately. This is not an attack, this is a minion. Minions, they go into play, but they don't attack their first turn. On the Nemesis's next turn, then any minions or power cards basically that are in play are going to hit. So this says Provoker, Persistent Gravehold suffers damage equal to the number of Fury tokens Rageborn has. These are the Fury tokens. There's none on Rageborn right now, but I'll explain what happens in just a minute. The minions, I forgot to mention, they have their health listed here. You just put the health tokens there. So if we were to draw another Nemesis card, so that there are now two Nemesis cards here, then again, what we do immediately is we first draw the next card of the deck. And this is an attack card. Normally, you're always going to resolve from the oldest to newest card, but attack cards happen immediately. So this attack has Unleash. So Unleash is, again, Rageborn is going to gain 1 Fury token. So we'll put 1 Fury token on there. And then it says, if there are 2 Nemesis turn order cards in the turn order discard pile, unleash 2 additional times. Well, there are 2 Nemesis cards here, so we're going to unleash 2 more times. That attack happens immediately, then it gets discarded, and then any other cards that were remaining, any minion or power cards would hit. So the Provoker, Gravehold suffers damage equal to the number of Fury tokens. Now there are 3 Fury tokens, so Gravehold suffers 3 damage. All right. So let's say future turns, we flip over another Nemesis card, and then this is a power card. So sometimes power cards might say the word immediately on them. If they did, you would resolve that immediate effect immediately. Otherwise, it kind of stays out just like the minions. They stay out 1 turn doing nothing, and then it's not until the next turn that they would use their power. So this thing says to discard, spend 6 ether, and it says power is 2. These are power tokens. So the minion's turn, that card came out. Before the Nemesis's next turn, let's say it was Gion's turn, if she had 6 ether, she could spend 6 and then discard this card. So that way it would never hurt anybody, basically. It wouldn't have a chance to spend its power. But if you didn't have enough money to do that, or you couldn't do that, maybe the Nemesis attacks 2 turns in a row, then it's going to hit its power. So again, in order though, it would go from whatever the oldest card, which is the Provoker, then it's going to go to the power card. So this is going to spend 1 power token, and then it's going to unleash twice. So now there are 5 Fury tokens on the Nemesis. When there are 4 or more Fury tokens, it's going to strike once. So this is where the strike deck comes in. So when it strikes, you're going to flip over a card, read what it says. Any player is going to suffer 4 damage. So you can choose whichever player you want, and they're going to suffer 4 damage. Take this card, shuffle it back into the strike deck, and then you're going to remove 3 Fury tokens from the Nemesis. And that would be the Nemesis's turn. If damage is dealt to a player that knocks them down to 0, let's say Gian had 2 health left, and for some reason we wanted to hit Gian with that strike that hit 2, that had 4. Sorry. So first things first, you would eliminate any life that was remaining, which is 2, and then whatever damage was left over is going to hit Gravehold, and so the remaining 2 damage would go to Gravehold, and then this player would be exhausted. So when a player is exhausted, they're not knocked out of the game. First thing they're going to do is they're going to lose any charge tokens they had on their board. Those are just gone. Then they have to lose 1 of their breaches. If there was a spell prepped to the breach and they lost that breach, the spell would also go away with it. You can never get these breaches back, so once they're gone, they're gone. And in addition, the exhausted player is they continue to play in the game. Also, the Nemesis is going to unleash twice whenever a player becomes exhausted, so that would get 2 more tokens on the Nemesis. But whenever a player is exhausted, they're not eliminated from the game. They stay in the game, but they can never regain any life back. Also, if a card says to deal damage to the player with the least amount of health, the player with no health does not count in that. It would have to go to the next player who had the lowest amount of health. If something did target this person particularly and they had no health, whatever damage would have gone to them is double damage onto Gravehold. So it is it's a big problem when they get hit. So the game is over whenever the bad guys win if they either knock Gravehold down to 0 or they exhaust all of the players that are playing. The good guys win if they can knock the Nemesis down to 0, or if they can get through this entire deck and then there are no cards in the deck and no minions or and no power cards or minions in front of the Nemesis. At that point, basically you've exhausted the Nemesis and the game is over. That is basically it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments. I think I've covered just about everything. But yeah, I hope you enjoy.